Filthy smog in London has created a health crisis, says the mayor. But can hedges really clean up the Capitals Act? And
you might learn some facts. Facts, Miss Lipstadt, which don't suit your opinions.
It put history on trial as a new film retells the story of the court case which destroyed David Irving's reputation. I talked to the American academic who successfully fought him off about fake news and Holocaust denial.
So I'm not comparing the two by a long shot, but in terms of fidelity to truth and fidelity to facts, I think there are disturbing parallels.
And the NHS in England is currently so short of GPs that we're spending £20 million on recruiting doctors from the European Union. Will Brexit change anything?
My income has dropped a lot, and I saw Lion Recruitment asking for GPs.
So Parliament will have its say on Britain's divorce from the EU after the Supreme Court told the government that it could not trigger Brexit without passing an Act of Parliament first. The Brexit Secretary told MPs that he respected the court's decision and would table a bill in the next few days. Most MPs and Lords are expected to vote it into law, but Labour and the SNP have said they will try to amend it. More from Scotland and the rest of the country in a moment, but first, here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
This is an odd one, Krishnan, because there was the government dreading this judgment, fighting it, spending public money trying to stop it, and yet when you stand back and look at reactions through the day, it's the government that looks quite chipper. I think if this had all happened 82 days ago when the High Court originally gave its verdict against the government, things might have been a bit more nervous in the government. Things are a bit more fluid. They feel they've put their own shape on events. They feel they've borne down on critics within Parliament. But a parliamentary chapter now opens in this story. You can never be quite sure where those sort of chapters will end. And this is how the day went here.
The Supreme Court ruled that the Prime Minister needs to pass a bill in Parliament before she can start the process of leaving the EU. It could be a very brief bill indeed, the court said, but it had to be passed. The government had been wrong to think it had the power to quit the EU without MPs' approval.
Today, by a majority of 8-3, the Supreme Court rules that the government cannot trigger Article 50 without an Act of Parliament authorising it to do so.
The judges unanimously rejected the idea that the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland should vote on triggering Brexit.
They should never have been excoriated.
The small cluster of pro-EU campaigners celebrated anyway.
You've still got hope alive. You think this could be stopped?
Absolutely.
But in the 82 days since the appeal to the Supreme Court began, opposition to Brexit in Parliament has wilted under pressure.
You feel with the case that you two helped to bring that you've given Parliament an opportunity it otherwise didn't have?
I think so, yes. There's a
How will you feel
opportunity.
if it doesn't use it? And it just lets Theresa May stick to her timetable?
If Parliament doesn't use it, that is as much a disgrace as far as democracy is concerned as it would be if the government had ramrod the royal prerogative through.
The ministerial car had gone astray, so David Davis, Secretary of State for exiting the EU, walked to the Commons. He told MPs a short bill would be produced soon.
I have the appear in front of Parliament, please.
The Prime Minister was not aiming to sideline democracy. The
Prime Minister spelt out referendum to the Labour benches.
She was aiming to carry out the will of the people, 17.4 million of them in the national interest.
The pressure of those referendum numbers means the big Commons vote triggering Brexit will not be a close-run thing. The SNP and a few Labour rebels will join with the Liberal Democrats and smaller parties opposing Brexit, probably not mustering triple figures between them. Voting for Brexit will be virtually all Tory MPs, perhaps 2/3 of Labour MPs, quite a few will be abstaining, with others commanding a thumping majority. But the Labour leader hopes he can get majorities to amend the bill along the way, perhaps forcing the government to produce a white paper or policy document outlining Brexit plans, perhaps forcing them to give a vote to MPs probably next year on whether to send the PM back with a different negotiating strategy.
We need to be informed, be able to challenge, be able to overturn, if necessary, the objectives and direction in which the government is going on those negotiations.
Brexit means Brexit, cake means cake.
must eat the cake and have it.
Across all parties, some think a dramatic economic downturn next year could mean issues like whether to stay in the customs union look different to voters and MPs in a year's time.
Those people down there waving the flag of Europe, thinking it might not happen.
Well, they're fully entitled to. This is a democracy.
But they're deluded in your view.
No, they're not deluded. I mean, if public opinion were to change on this matter, Parliament might reconsider it. I don't think we should ignore that possibility.
In the Commons, David Davis tried to warn off Remainers who might try to use Parliament to stop or dilute Brexit.
Parliament will rightly scrutinise and debate this legislation, but I trust no one will seek to make it a vehicle for attempts to thwart the will of the people or frustrate or delay the process of exit from the European Union.
The Supreme Court has judged MPs must authorise the triggering of Brexit. Now, starting with debates in the Commons next week, we'll discover Parliament's appetite for challenging Theresa May's plans.
Gary, where do you see the trouble coming, if any, with this bill?
It comes soon next week. We probably move to the Commons starting on Monday, be a week or so in the Commons, a bit longer in the Lords. As I said, the big votes are not so much the problem here. It's the amendments along the way. And it sounded a little bit in the House of Commons, though you could imagine a coalition forming of Conservative and Labour MPs trying to get a white paper out of the government. That would force Theresa May to do something she doesn't want to do, write down on a piece of paper, more or less the point she made in her speech probably, but in a way that she can be held to account more and have this document waved at her over time. But I think the key amendment they'll be looking for is trying to put some sort of time device under her Brexit plans so that later, not so late that it's right at the very, very end of the entire process, but late enough that the negotiations have started. We know the outline of the plan. Parliament, some MPs in Parliament would like to have a vote whereby they could turn around and tell Theresa May, actually rip up that plan and go back with another one. Whether they get there, another matter.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, outside the corridors of Westminster, what do people make of the ruling? Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, has been to Thurrock in Essex, which had one of the highest votes in favour of Brexit anywhere in the country, to speak to those who voted out.
Away from the grandeur of the Supreme Court, and it's on the streets and doorsteps of Britain that today's decision really matters. For all the talk of uncertainty, here in Essex, one thing was quite certain. They wanted out. Thurrock recorded one of the highest votes for leave at just over 72%. So what do they make of the fact Brexit negotiations can't go ahead without Parliament's say-so?
Me, personally, I want it to be out. It's as simple as that. You know, if it goes through Parliament and then it goes the other way, fair enough. It's a democratic process. That's what the country is.
But I mean, of course, people are saying they've had a democratic process in the referendum.
But Parliament weren't involved. So, you know, everybody should be involved.
Even though we voted out, still, people that wanted in can still have a say in that. Yeah, I agree with that then. The Parliament should have a say in that.
But for others, today's decision is about anything but democracy.
We voted out. We're the English people. I'm not saying Britain, because everyone can be British. I'm English, and we voted out.
What is wrong with it going through Parliament?
I don't know. I don't really understand why they're butting their nose in. If we voted it out, surely she's got to say we're out.
Do you feel disappointed?
No, not really. What do you expect with it? Come on.
Yes, I suppose it is a worry for me that they're going to water it down. I think they're going to make some sort of attempt to, what can I say, sort of inveigle their way out of the heart of what we wanted when we wanted to vote out. We wanted to go out completely and not have some kind of midline that they can sort of wiggle it one way or the other.
And what do you feel about that?
It annoys me slightly, if I'm honest with you.
However quickly the government put together a bill, the very fact Brexit plans are having to go through Parliament is fueling fears among some that the referendum's promise of giving power to the people is not quite what it seemed.
Well, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is furious that the devolved assemblies won't be getting their own say, declaring it showed that claims about Scotland being an equal partner were simply empty rhetoric and worthless. And she warned it might be better to take our future into our own hands. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, is in Edinburgh. Michael.
Well, last week Alex Salmond said there could be a second independence referendum as early as the autumn of next year. That would be just 4 years after the last one. And Nicola Sturgeon has said that it would be logical to hold such a referendum before the end of the Brexit negotiation process, which ends, of course, in the spring of 2019. And certainly after today, the Scottish Government does seem to be running out of options, and a referendum looks ever so slightly more likely.
On the devolution issues, the court unanimously rules that UK ministers are not legally compelled to consult the devolved legislatures before triggering Article 50.
Today's judgment held an extra dimension here in Edinburgh, since the Scottish Government had claimed the Holyrood Parliament also had a legal right to a say before the Article 50 process starts. By 11 to none, the highest judges in the land agreed Scottish MSPs would have no formal role.
The court is now adjourned.
Afterwards, Nicola Sturgeon again threatened a second independence referendum.
What's going to happen over the process of Brexit is going to have profound implications for our economy and our society, for every aspect of our life. And for Scotland simply to be ignored, I think, is not good enough. But it raises a much more fundamental question, much bigger than whether we're in or out of the EU. And that is, who decides the big issues about the future of Scotland? Is that a Westminster government with one MP in Scotland, or is that the people of Scotland? And that's a choice that I think increasingly emerges.
So why don't we just go on with the referendum?
Well, I've made my views clear, I've made the process clear, and I'll continue to stand up for Scotland's interests.
Last week she agreed it was very likely all but inevitable. But a new vote on Scotland's future won't be simple. Nicola Sturgeon is saying that the people of Scotland are being ignored over Brexit. Do you agree with her?
I do, yeah. I do.
She's saying that perhaps the only answer is another referendum on Scottish independence.
Bring it on. Yeah, bring it on. Yeah.
Would you see a referendum on independence as a way of staying in the European Union?
It's a way of controlling our own destiny.
So do you think there should be another referendum on independence as a way of staying in the European Union?
We can't go on having referendums, that's for sure.
Asking people about Brexit?
I don't have a clue.
You don't have a clue?
No.
Do you know what Brexit is?
No, I do pay attention to it, pal.
Since meeting Theresa May in July, Nicola Sturgeon has demanded special arrangements for Scotland, such as remaining inside the single market. But today, one former SNP leader accused Sturgeon of pointless posturing in demanding a separate settlement the UK government can't deliver, he said. And this former deputy leader, who also backed Brexit, is equally critical.
My advice to her has been, publicly, because I'm not in the inner circles, is stop this obsession with Brexit, realise we're in a new paradigm. The day we voted to come out of the EU, it was a new paradigm.
So an independence referendum, say next year, would be a mistake in your view?
Very bad mistake. We would lose it because uncertainty would dominate it.
Law professor Adam Tompkins is the Conservatives' constitution spokesman at Holyrood. Scotland is now heading for a second referendum, perhaps next year, as Alex Salmond has suggested?
Well, I certainly hope not. And I tell you what, most Scots also hope not. I mean, support for a second independence referendum is falling through the floor as we speak. The most recent polls suggest that fewer than 2 in 5 Scots want a second independence referendum. Even a number of those people who want independence don't want a second independence referendum right now.
And some SNP figures are cautious about a second referendum next year. It would need a bigger public reaction to Brexit, they think, before it was worth the risk. Well, any calculations by the SNP about holding a referendum will be extremely difficult. Public opinion on the issue hasn't really shifted over the last 2.5 years, whereas the economics of independence do look rather less favourable. Much in the coming months could depend on the relationship between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. They're due to meet, along with the other leaders of the devolved governments, in Cardiff next week.
Michael Crick. Well, joining me now is Gina Miller, the lead claimant who brought the legal challenge, and also joining us, Conservative MP Ozzy Kwarteng, Labour MP and chair of the Vote Leave Watch campaign, Chuka Umunna, Also here, UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn and Stephen Gethins from the Scottish National Party. Gina Miller, you've won them, these people, the rights to vote. What do you want them to do now?
Do their job. Debate in Parliament about the best course to take as we leave the EU.
But they're talking about this being very quick and simple. Is that what you meant? A quick and simple vote? Just get on with it.
That's not up to me. I'm not the politician. My question was a legitimate one to the courts about where powers begin and end. Where do the government's powers begin and end? And if the courts didn't think it was a valid question, and if it was a simple question to answer, we wouldn't have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. There were obviously things that needed to debate. That's why it wasn't unanimous. It was 8-3 win. But now it is a win, which means that Parliament, the MPs, have to now debate how we leave.
Kwasi Kwarteng, why did you call this outrageous and offensive, arrogant, when this began?
I did say that. I thought that, and forgive me if I'm being cynical, but I thought the reason why the court case was brought was simply one in order to frustrate the process, and many people feel that. I know Gina.
Do you think you were wrong about that?
Well, the process has been seen. We've seen through it. We've come to the end, and the judges have made their decision, and I respect their decision.
But do you respect Gina Miller's motivations?
I can't say what her motivations were. It seemed at the time, and I looked at some of the remarks that she made. Obviously, I've met her subsequently and know she's very charming and well-intentioned. But at the time, it seemed like sour grapes from people who were very upset that they'd lost the referendum and wanted to frustrate the result at any cost.
Was it sour grapes?
Absolutely not. I'm not sure how I can, on my own, have stopped the whole direction of Brexit. My question was a much more fundamental one. It was one about the foundations of our constitution. It obviously had ramifications for Brexit, and because it's this fundamental question about where the Prime Minister's powers begins and ends.
Chuka Umunna, as an MP, you think Brexit's bad for Britain, don't you?
I didn't support it. I voted to remain, but I accept the result. But look,
you still think it's a bad idea, don't you?
It should not have been necessary for Gina to bring this case. There was a certain hypocrisy in those who argued for us to leave the European Union. They did so on the basis that Parliament, the voice of the people through Parliament, should be sovereign. And then the Prime Minister coming along like some pseudo-dictator, saying that only she should have a say on the way that we leave the European Union. I accept there's a mandate for the government to take us out of the European Union, but I'm absolutely clear I'm not going to just sit by while they do so in a way that is going to trash the livelihoods of middle and lower income people in my constituency, and to do so in a way which disregards many of the promises that were made. For example, a lot of people now who voted leave, who are watching this programme, expect £350 million per week extra to go to the NHS. We have a right through Parliament to hold them to account for those promises that were made and ensure that the way in which we leave the European Union is in the British national interest and the interest of families in my constituency and every other.
You and I were in the Parliament before the last election, and also before the referendum, and there was a vote in Parliament. You remember. You probably took part in it too. We had a vote to hold a referendum. It was very clear. Nobody said at the time that there was any way in which Parliament would reverse that result. I mean,
I'm not arguing.
It would make a total mockery of it.
I'm not talking about reversing. I'm not talking about reversing the result. What I'm talking about is Parliament actually getting a say on the way in which we leave the European Union, which is going to have a fundamental impact on our public services.
The Prime Minister of being a dictator.
That was the word. That was like a pseudo-dictator. Saying that she can just take us out of the European Union on royal prerogative. And all that Gina's court case was seeking to do was to give you, me, every other member of Parliament on behalf of the people.
But how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? Because you can't put £350 million a week into an amendment, because that's a money bill. You can't amend Article 50. So how are you going to do all of this?
Well, this is the big question, because we don't actually know what scope there is going to be in the bill, which we've been told is going to be published on Thursday, for us to make amendments. And don't forget as well, Christian, it's not just the Article 50 bill, it's the Great Repeal bill as well. There's a whole raft of legislation. I mean, this is a huge
Let me bring in Stephen Gethin, because you also think Brexit is a terrible idea, but unlike Shukramuna, who's going to vote it through with Article 50 ultimately, you're not.
Yeah, but today was about, and actually, one thing I'll say, and I'm glad Gina's here, we owe a debt of gratitude. We do. Democracy doesn't begin and end in the Palace of Westminster, and politicians in London need to start figuring this out. This is an enormous job, and therefore, scrutinising it, the impact it will have on universities, on our health service, on EU nationals who have made this country their home and should be able to remain, on our health, on a whole range of areas is immense, and that's why you have a parliament to scrutinise it.
But
and
you are going to thwart the will of the people.
Hold on, and I have no idea why the UK government didn't want to put it under scrutiny. If they had the courage of their convictions and they were confident in what they're doing, they wouldn't have had a problem with this.
Patrick O'Flynn, is this what the Brexit Secretary meant by thwarting the will of the people?
Well, look, I find the views of all four other contributors somewhat deficient. Gina, I think, is what a demographer might call representative from a very small section of Britain, which is very high.
48%.
No.
Which section of society
Excuse me,
then?
can I just finish? Yeah, very high-earning London households used to getting their own way, I would sum it up as. Kwasi, his government messed up. It was David Cameron's seat of his pants stuff. He said, listen, the referendum advisory and Article 50 not triggered as David Cameron promised straight away, which would have avoided all this. Stephen, Scotland voted to handle these issues as a united kingdom and should accept the result. And if I can just finish. Chucker, you're so opaque. I know what your mate Paul Farrelly, who represents Newcastle-under-Lyme next door to Stoke-on-Trent, thinks. He's going to try and block Brexit. Your formulation of no blank cheques, you know, a lot of people think this guy is sitting on the fence. Now, I'm going to be knocking on doors in Stoke-on-Trent on Thursday. What should I tell a voter who says, I can't tell if that Chucker Immuno wants to leave or to stay in the EU?
I can answer the question directly. I've said I accepted the terms under which the referendum was the rules, and therefore I find it very hard to set my face against triggering Article 50 for that reason. Sure. But that does not mean, and that's the process of triggering Article 50 for views, this 2-year negotiation process, that is very different from the content of the deal. And that's where the blank cheque is concerned. Because surely, let me ask Patrick, are you saying that UKIP wants to give the Prime Minister a blank cheque to do whatever she wants on the deal? Are you seriously saying that?
I'm saying that you are obviously one of the 95% of Labour MPs who campaigned against leaving the EU.
Yeah, but what do you think they should do is should they just vote it through to give Theresa May the power to
Parliament effectively handed the decision to the British people and calling for parliamentary sovereignty only against the views of the people after having turned a blind eye to selling it out to Brussels for 40 years.
Hold on. Let me bring in Stephen Gethers.
You conducted, and I actually think Patrick here is stating why UKIP have never even saved a parliamentary deposit in Scotland. You're understating why we campaigned on it. You've campaigned on a blank piece of paper. You didn't give us any details about what you planned. That blank piece of paper was an act of gross irresponsibility. We're having to fill in the blanks and to touch up the mess that you made along with your colleagues in the Tory party.
We had an exhaustive referendum campaign.
It wasn't clear.
We had an exhaustive referendum campaign. Every conceivable issue was raised.
Well, we were promised immigration powers.
Maybe not Scotland alone, but Scotland had voted to take these decisions as part of a united kingdom, and the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Why are we revisiting all of this anyway?
Because they are.
We have to move on.
We do.
Just let her make the point.
You need to move on.
Yes.
There wasn't any legal certainty about how Article 50 needed to be triggered. There wasn't. That's why I went to the courts. It's now been decided. You need to go ahead and have that debate in Parliament.
I give you credit, as I said, that the government
No, you don't give me
sloppy.
credit, actually, because you put me in a box and you don't know who I am. So how dare you presume you know who I am, that I'm a London elite
look, there are
who lives
certain
in
facts of all of us that get written and London Remain household. A lot of the country think London high-income households used to getting their own way. Well, out in the country, there are many households that have hardly got their own way on anything.
You know nothing about me, so don't make this personal.
I agree with Gina on this.
Don't make it personal. Talk about my case, not about me.
I agree.
I was just saying you represent a certain strand of
I don't
opinion.
actually represent anyone other than myself. I represent myself.
If you look at my constituency, 80% Remain. The idea that somehow everyone's having a ball and it's wonderful and there's a bunch of rich people living in £1 million houses is simply not the case. I tell you, 40% of children growing up in my constituency country are living in absolute poverty. So
Yes.
don't go around making these sweeping generalisations.
Let's get to the debate that Gina Miller has forced, which is the kind of Brexit and the kind of Article 50 negotiation we are going to have. Kwasi Kwarteng, why do you want this to be a quick rubber stamp? Why shouldn't MPs get to decide on Theresa May's 12-point plan?
This is a complete fantasy. We are about to engage, once Article 50 is triggered, on a very complicated set of negotiations with 27 other member states of the EU. Nobody has any idea, nobody around this table, nobody in the country has any idea how those negotiations
But if a majority of MPs think leaving the single market is crazy, why should you get a rubber stamp?
That you can have an amendment that will bind the government's negotiating position for 2 years, regardless of what the other people are saying, is insane. There's no way you can do that.
Stephen Gethens, is there any way you can force the government to come back to Parliament?
Well, do you know something that strikes me is we offered a compromise around this. Before Christmas time, we offered a compromise, and the UK government aren't willing to meet us halfway. Now, we will be using everything at our disposal. We'll be putting down amendments. The Scottish Government will be doing what we can do. Now, this should be part about having a sensible debate. This is an enormous issue. It has effect on quality of life. Chuka was quite right. He was talking about the poverty that exists in his constituency. Poverty that could be made worse if you don't get this right in terms of jobs and the economy. This is why we have a parliament. And again, coming back to Gina, that parliaments and democracies rely on citizens being engaged. They don't just rely on the MPs going away. And that's what we've seen in this. And actually, we should all be ashamed of the fact that it's taken a private citizen to bring this back and to underscore democracy.
Chuka, let me ask you, Nicola Sturgeon said, regardless of the ruling in the Supreme Court, there is a moral obligation to give Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland a say in this negotiation. Is she right in that?
Well, I think this is a UK-wide decision, and there are certain processes. The Council of Ministers across the UK from the different devolved administrations where they should be consulted. But this was a UK decision.
So no? Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
Personally, one of the reasons I campaigned so strongly to Remain is because I hate the politics of division, this idea of setting different groups against each other. And my fear with Nicola Sturgeon's approach is that in the end, her principal interest is dividing our country and splitting off Scotland. That's my view, and I don't agree with it.
Do you know something? In Scotland, we voted 2-1 to Remain, and we were promised during the independence referendum.
It was
2-1.
It was
2-1 to Remain. Okay.
It was 60.
And if we go back to your argument from earlier on as well, you were talking about the independence referendum. We were promised the only way that you can remain part of the European Union is by remaining part of the United Kingdom. Then we were promised during the EU referendum campaign by Michael Gove that, well, you could get some powers over immigration. That's been refused. Then we were told that we'd be a partnership of equals and we could have an equal say in partnership with the United Kingdom. That's been refused. All these solemn pledges that have been refused time after time. Now, the Scottish Government has a responsibility to defend jobs, the economy and the interests of people in Scotland, the same way with the Welsh Government and the Northern Irish Government. Now, we've put forward this compromise. We're trying to reach a halfway. This was a pretty big deal for the Scottish Government to do, even trying to put to one side the independence referendum, and that was turned down. And I'm not sure what kind of message that's sending out, but it's not a good one about a partnership.
Aren't you helping the cause of Scottish independence by not giving them a say?
Well, I think the UK decision was made as the United Kingdom. I think Chuka made a very good point about that. I think the vote in Scotland, and I see SNP MPs all the time, was slightly closer than you put out. It's 60-40. And it's very striking. And it's very striking that every single one of the SNP MPs, 56, speak for Remain. But 40% of the actual entire population of Scotland voted for Brexit. And that's a very interesting democratic deficit that you have to square.
All of our constituencies voted Remain. You talk about representing your constituents, OK? My constituents voted overwhelmingly to remain part because their jobs at University of St Andrews, jobs are really tied up in the European Union.
Iron discipline on one side of the question. Well, no, we all know that Scotland was quite split on this issue. I mean, even you have to accept that. And I think that's an interesting debate. And I think if they want to go down the path of independence, that's up to them. But be careful what you wish for.
I'm going to give Gina Miller the last word. I mean, you've unleashed this debate. It's already begun. What do you think?
Well, I thought it was a very interesting point. You were talking about listening to the 40% in Scotland as well as the 60%. Right. What about listening to the 48% in the UK, the 52%? Because actually, if anyone tries to bring up a sensible debate about Brexit and our way forward, they're shot down in flames. And I've experienced that for 7 months from all walks and all media. So I think we have to have fairness as we go forward. It has to be a sensible debate, and that's what I'm asking you all to do.
Are you giving
That's
up
why I
now?
spend my money.
Are you out of this now, or are you going to keep
I'm
fighting?
not a politician. I'm going to go back to my day job, and it's over to the politicians now. I know my case has been brought into politics, but I'm not in politics.
Thank you all very much indeed for coming in tonight. Thank you. Cathy. Oh, sorry, let me just say, later, despite Brexit, we've discovered the government is spending millions trying to recruit hundreds of doctors from Europe to help tackle the shortage of GPs. Victoria MacDonald will be reporting on that. Now, Cathy.
Thanks, Christian. Now, the White House has just confirmed Donald Trump still believes millions voted illegally in the election, brushing aside all requests for concrete evidence. But just 4 days into his presidency, Mr. Trump is moving swiftly to cement his political agenda. Today, pushing ahead with 2 controversial oil pipelines, much to the dismay of environmentalists. And he fixed car makers in his sights again, too, demanding that they create more American jobs. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in Washington. Lindsay.
Cathy, it's interesting how things niggle at Donald Trump. He just can't stop talking about this issue of the election. He won it, but of course Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 3 million votes. Last night he was meeting legislators from both sides of the House. He said, you know, there must have been between 3 and 5 million illegal aliens who voted. That's the only explanation for her winning the popular vote. Now, he said this several times before without providing any evidence. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who is an ally of his, said, look, there's no evidence. Just stop talking about it. Lindsey Graham, he's another Republican senator. He used the phrase, knock this off. But today, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, was sent out, and he again had to defend this issue, even though he too doesn't seem to have any evidence.
The president does believe that. He has stated that before. I think he stated his concerns of voter fraud and people voting illegally during the campaign. And he continues to maintain that belief based on studies and evidence that people have presented to him.
But exactly what evidence? Speaker Ryan today said there's no evidence. The National Association of Secretaries of State say that they don't agree with the president's assessment. What evidence do you have?
As I said, I think the president has believed that for a while based on studies and information he has.
But in the White House today, there were many visitors not talking about that. The main topic of conversation was rolling back environmental protection. With a few strokes of the pen, President Trump began to dismantle President Obama's environmental legacy today. 5 executive orders will lift blocks on the Dakota Access and Keystone oil pipelines and slash environmental regulations.
We'll see if we can get that pipeline built. A lot of jobs, 28,000 jobs. Great construction jobs.
The president is yet to explain how he arrived at that figure, nor at this vision of himself.
I am, to a large extent, an environmentalist. I believe I'm a big person when it comes to the environment. I've received awards on the environment.
Stop climate deniers! Protesters might like to hear what awards. No one seems to have any record. They fear the Dakota oil pipeline would pollute the water supply, desecrate Native American land, and more broadly, promote the fossil fuel industry, accelerating climate change. But President Trump says his measures will boost the economy, and that's the priority. One of the new administration's first acts was to wipe all mention of climate change from the White House website. Staff at the Environmental Protection Agency have been told to freeze all grants to fund research, air quality monitoring and education. The man nominated to head the agency, Scott Pruitt, is a climate change skeptic.
I believe the ability to measure with precision the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate.
He previously sued the agency he'll soon lead. This morning, President Trump told leaders of the auto industry that environmental controls were just too onerous.
We will build our own pipeline. We will build our own pipes. That's what it has to do with, like we used to in the old days.
Good for employment, he says, but environmentalists fear what his agenda means for the future.
Low winds and traffic fumes are filling the skies with a thick layer of smog, sending air quality plunging and triggering pollution alerts in cities across the country. With hundreds of schools in areas which breach legal pollution limits, London's Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has proposed new measures, including hedges to block out harmful fumes. But is that enough? Paul McNamara reports.
The fog's lifted a little today. It makes it easier to see whatever else is being pumped out into the air we breathe. Across the country, toxic air alerts have been issued. Yesterday morning, this primary school restricted the time its youngest children with the most vulnerable lungs were outside. Their concerns shared by parents at other schools across the capital to varying degrees.
My husband's got asthma and he's badly affected. The kids they complain about the smell, but other than that, we haven't noticed it.
It's not nice to breathe. I was coughing and then, my friend said that the air's being polluting, so I thought it was that.
Have you ever kept the kids indoors because you're worried about it, you know?
No, not yet, but we have been talking about, getting rid of the car altogether or getting an electric car.
When the pollution gets bad, do you notice it at all?
No.
Not at all?
Never.
But this isn't an issue exclusive to London, although the capital did record the worst possible score of 10 out of 10 for air quality today. It's affecting large parts of the rest of the country too. This morning, pollution levels of 8 were recorded in the West Sussex village of Storrington and in Norwich. Oxford measured 7, and Bristol, Leicester and Leeds all measured 6, the level where adults should consider reducing strenuous physical activity, particularly outdoors.
Well, pollution is nothing new, so why is this an issue right now? Well, first of all, it's cold, and that can always create problems for people with pre-existing conditions like asthma. But there's also very little wind at the moment, meaning that any pollution that is being created isn't being blown away. Ultimately, though, it'll take a lot more than a strong breeze to sort out Britain's poor air quality. Many of the vehicles on Britain's roads are diesel, and experts say that's what needs to be changed.
It's a point that those able to effect change are making to anyone that will listen.
I want to get rid of the most poisonous cars from our streets.
Today, London's mayor announced funds to protect 50 schools, including planting hedges and installing air monitors that warn when children can't go outside. A good start, but campaigners say 3,000 schools across the country also need them.
We get information about UV levels so we can protect ourselves from sunburn. We ought to have information about air pollution levels. The damage that it's doing is severe. It can permanently damage children's lungs if air pollution levels are high, and we know it's having an effect on people with bronchitis and asthma. We should have access to that information.
Both campaigners and London's mayor are calling for a new, stricter Clean Air Act. Governments say they are committed to cutting harmful emissions and have pledged more than £2 billion since 2011 to increase the uptake of ultra-low emissions vehicles. Not that you may have guessed that from looking at Britain's roads.
Paul McNamara on London's filthy air. Well, more now on the impact of Brexit. And this programme has discovered that the government is set to spend £20 million recruiting doctors from the EU to work as GPs in England. The recruitment campaign, announced last April, is looking to hire around 500 doctors over the next 4 years. But so far, they've only found a handful. Our cameras were given exclusive access to one private company which is trying to recruit doctors from Europe, as our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald reports.
It's not even 8 a.m. and the Lowther surgery is filling up. It's first come, first served to see a GP every weekday morning. Sometimes the queues go out the door. The pressures are the same elsewhere, of course, too many patients. But here in Whitehaven, Cumbria, they have an added problem. Not enough doctors. 1 in 4 GP posts are unfilled, twice the national average.
Hi there, how are you feeling?
Once there were 8 partners here, now there are only 2, helped by 3 doctors on salary.
So what time do you leave home and what time do you get back home?
So I leave home at about 20 to 7 in the morning, and I always leave here by 11 o'clock.
PM?
PM, yes. I won't stay later than 11 o'clock.
So what to do about situations like this? Well, NHS England does have a plan, a 5-year plan to recruit and retain more family doctors. And as we've also discovered via a Freedom of Information request, They've also set aside £20 million to hire 500 GPs from abroad.
Nearly a year in, a pilot scheme has managed to recruit just 12 European doctors, soon to arrive in Lincolnshire. So where can they be found? Portugal is on the list. It's a fertile recruiting ground, not least because GPs could earn 40% more by coming to the UK.
Good afternoon, Doctor. Good afternoon.
This is a recruitment session in Lisbon last weekend. A company, Primary Care People, interviewed 8 doctors here and in Porto. It's not part of the NHS England scheme, but they've identified a gaping hole in the market, and they think they can fill at least part of it. The obvious question to a 58-year-old family doctor is why?
2 years ago, Portugal was in a very severe austerity, so my income has dropped a lot, and I saw Lion Recruitment asking for GPs, so I saw that as an amazing opportunity.
How are you?
So money for him, but for another it was feeling unappreciated.
I'm working and I do my best, but I think nobody recognizes it. So there is a sensation of frustration. I don't know how to say in English. Frustration. But is it worthwhile to change this security job for another venture in Manchester or Birmingham? I don't know.
A sentiment perhaps recognised by UK family doctors. Language is, and this was obvious, one of the biggest barriers. The company has set up a scholarship scheme to help them improve their English and pass the necessary exams.
It's not about getting clinicians, getting them in, putting them into a practice which, you know, has got a severe need in terms of workforce. This is about a long-term sustainable solution. So if we have clinicians coming in and they feel comfortable, they feel that this was a conscious decision that they made, actually in 3 years' time when someone speaks to that clinician about what it's like in the UK, they're going to say, yes, it's great.
Of course, it's not free. They will charge the NHS £120,000 for each GP. Cheaper, they say, than the cost of locums, and it takes into account the training and relocation.
So there's a lot of associated costs that we will take on board as an organisation, which means that there has to be a cost element in terms of it needs to make financial sense for us to be able to do it as well.
There is a real sense of urgency to all this, not only because, of course, we need more doctors back in England, but because of Brexit looming on the horizon. They know that they have to get the Portuguese GPs from here to there as soon as possible.
Even without reassurances from the UK government that they will be allowed to stay post-Brexit, this doctor wasn't concerned.
That doesn't worry me at all, because I think we should keep travelling abroad and gaining experiences in other countries and dealing with other cultures.
Speak to medical authorities in Portugal, however, and they are conflicted. England is, after all, planning to lure away expensively trained talent.
What we are seeing is we are seeing the best going abroad. And of course, this in the medium term will have their effects in our NHS. And so we are very, very worried about that.
Back in Whitehaven, however, the recruitment problem remains the same. Wherever the doctors come from. Geography, for a start. It's a long way from training opportunities or big hospitals or even airports to get back home.
We're okay, providing nobody leaves and providing nobody gets ill. But if that situation changes, it took at least a year to find each of our salaried partners. Even though we keep reinventing what we're doing, if we can't add more people into the pot down the track, we aren't going to be able to keep the service going. So we're okay now, but something's got to change.
And across England, 1 in 8 posts are unfilled. There's a shortage of trainees and 1/3 of family doctors are due to retire in the next 5 years. It's just not yet obvious what part Europe can play in fixing this problem.
Victoria MacDonald reporting there. Now, around £8 billion has been wiped off the value of shares in British Telecom after the company revealed an accounting scandal in its Italian division was more serious than first thought. BT said an internal investigation had revealed long-running improper accounting practices, meaning profits had been overstated for a number of years. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, is here with more. And Siobhan, this is pretty dramatic, isn't it?
It certainly is, Kathy. Let's take a look at this graph of its share price over the past few days. You don't need to be a market expert to see that this is very bad news for BT today. The shares, as you can see there, fell off a cliff this morning, down 20-odd%. £8 billion, as you say, on the day, in what has to be one of the most torrid days ever for the company. So what happened? Well, BT over the summer said it had discovered what it called accounting irregularities inside its Italian division and had set aside £145 million to account for it. Then this morning, suddenly out of the blue, it almost trebled that figure to £530 million, saying that those inappropriate accounting practices had spread far deeper than they had originally thought and had resulted, as you said, in the overstatement of earnings over several years. Now, BT has said it is deeply distressed, disturbed, disappointed in the discovery, that it takes it extremely seriously. It said that it has suspended the two most senior executives in the Italian business unit, and today a third has resigned.
So is that the end of it then?
Well, BT certainly hopes that it will be, but it has pointed out that the financial hole inside the Italian unit could yet get bigger. And tonight, Italian prosecutors have confirmed to this programme that they've opened a criminal investigation into the Italian unit. So this is very bad news for what is one of Britain's biggest companies, whose shares, let's not forget, are owned by about 1 million ordinary investors, people like you and me, Kathy, and pension funds up and down the country, who tonight will be pretty aggrieved at what's happened.
Indeed, Siobhan, thank you very much. Krish.
After the break, in what's now dubbed the post-truth era...
Well, freedom of speech means you can say whatever you want. What you can't do is lie and then expect not to be accountable for it.
The new film Denial recreates a landmark battle for truth when David Irving sued the historian Deborah Lipstadt for calling him a Holocaust denier. We talked to her and Timothy Spall, one of the movie stars.
Welcome back. Well, at a time of fake news, alternative facts and unchecked conspiracy theories, a new film celebrates the truth and one woman's courageous stand. Denial tells the story of the legal battle between David Irving and Deborah Lipstadt, the professor he sued for libel after she called him a Holocaust denier.
Not say scum! Not say scum!
David Irving took the American historian Deborah Lipstadt to court after she claimed he tried to deny the Holocaust took place. The case put history on trial. The judge concluded that Irving's denial of the existence of the gas chambers and his attendance at extreme right rallies offered proof that he was a Holocaust denier. But with his reputation in ruins, that very night he continued his denial on this programme.
Do you still believe that hundreds of thousands of Jews were not systematically exterminated in gas chambers in Auschwitz?
I still believe that hundreds of thousands of Jews were not systematically exterminated in gas chambers in Auschwitz or in Birkenau.
My books have been published by some of the greatest publishing houses in the world. Viking Press, William Morrow, E.P. Dutton. I have to conclude that the reason you don't engage with people you disagree with is because you can't. And you might learn some facts. Facts, Miss Lipstadt, which don't suit your opinions.
As the case is made into a film, Irving claims that thanks to the internet, his views on the Holocaust are regaining an audience and lining his pockets. Timothy Spall, I read that you were not sure whether you wanted to take on this role at first. Was it too loathsome to contemplate?
I knew that the character was very much the antagonist in this, and his role is one that we see a man with these views that are so upsetting to so many people and so on and so forth. So difficulty was I needed to know, was there enough in there for me to be able to build a rounded character and somehow bring a kind of inner life to it.
The whole business of Holocaust denial and people exploring that on the internet, do you think, Deborah, it's connected to the sort of post-truth universe that we seem to be living
Well,
in?
whether it's connected or not, it's the same phenomenon.
David Irving, claims there weren't 6 million who were killed. No one was killed in gas chambers. Hitler didn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. Jews have made this all up. And I think we're seeing that today. We're seeing that today where truth doesn't matter. If I believe something very strongly and yell about it, it must be true. And sadly, we're seeing that certainly in my country, at the highest levels, all sorts of things just being made up out of whole cloth. I take a lie, I reshape it as my opinion, I stand for it strongly, and I let it encroach on the facts.
I mean, there is a clear parallel, isn't there, with the media in part giving David Irving a platform. Now the media has given Donald Trump a platform, and there are parallels, aren't there? The film it seems very timely in that sense, doesn't it?
When there are paradigm shifts in the world where things are shaving the world order and so on and so forth, and many of the old institutions are being distrusted, like the church and so on, faith and all that is reducing, and other things are taking over its place, people get insecure. Old industries are closing, they get insecure, and a mass feeling seems to come about, and you can sense a feeling. And when that feeling comes, and it happens in certain times of history, people grab hold of things. They want to look out for things. They want strong leaders. They want to grab things that might be true or might not to make them feel better. Because in a sense, there's a sense of being lost. And I think at this moment in time, it feels to me that might be happening. But now there's massive of information. And information and facts are two different things.
And you called out a maverick academic on a lie, but how do you call out a president when he's not telling the truth?
Well, I think the media gets it this time. They didn't get it during the election, but the New York Times talked about the press secretary lying about the attendance at the inauguration. Yesterday we had the president make a claim about the number of illegal people who voted. Now, the thought that a person who was in the United States illegally would risk their status and go and vote, we have to show identification and their authorities all around and things like that, is ludicrous. But I think the Washington Post headline is, "Without evidence, President Trump claims." I think they're going to hold his feet to the fire, but I don't think it's going to help. This is a story about truth and the need for everyone, irrespective of what their political views are, to care about the truth, to fight for the truth, and demand that others do as well.
Deborah Lipstadt, Timothy Spall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just time to tell you the altogether happier musical La La Land is leading the pack in the Oscars with a record equalling 14 nominations. There's also a nod for the British actor Dev Patel in the Best Supporting category for Lion, while fellow Brit Naomi Harris, best known for her role as Miss Moneypenny, has been nominated for her role in Moonlight.
And in the Best Short Documentary category, a piece by Marcel Mettel-Siefen has been shortlisted, a filmmaker whose work featured on Channel 4 News. Watani, My Homeland follows the fortunes of a Syrian family from Aleppo as they move to Germany. The winners of this year's Academy Awards will be revealed at the end of next month.
And on tomorrow night's programme, a special report on the battle for Mosul, with unique access to the top team of the Iraqi Golden Division.
That's tomorrow, but tonight, that's it from us.
That's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
Good evening.